Sometimes, the most ordinary moment can change everything forever. When Elias Stoltzfus found that broken child by the roadside, bleeding and barely breathing, his father's heart wouldn't let him walk away. The Amish farmer carried the boy home to his simple house in Lancaster County. He cleaned the wounds with gentle hands and sat by the bedside all night, praying and wondering who could hurt a child so badly. The next morning brought answers he never expected. 5 black helicopters landed on his farm, filling his quiet world with noise and questions. Government agents wanted to know about the boy, about secrets that an Amish man couldn't possibly understand. But what they discovered would shake both worlds: the peaceful farming community and the dangerous forces hunting that child. What was so important about this injured boy that it brought the full power of the federal government to an Amish doorstep? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening shadows stretched long across the Stoltzfus farm as Elias carried the unconscious boy through his front door. At 47, Elias possessed the steady strength that came from decades of honest labor, broad shoulders that had carried countless burdens, gentle hands that had delivered calves and mended broken wings, and a heart that his late wife Martha used to say was too big for his own good. "Papa, what happened?" Sarah rushed to meet them, her 17-year-old face creased with concern. She had inherited her mother's intuitive compassion and her father's steady nerves, qualities that made her invaluable during the endless small crises of farm life. "Found him by the old stone bridge," Elias said quietly, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man who chose his words carefully. "Hurt bad. Get the clean linens from your mother's chest." Sarah nodded and hurried upstairs, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden steps. The Stoltzfus home reflected 3 generations of careful stewardship, hand-hewn beams darkened with age, furniture built to last centuries, and the lingering scent of Martha's herb garden that still grew wild behind the kitchen. Elias laid the boy gently on the bed in the small room they'd prepared for guests who sometimes sought shelter during harsh winters. In the lamplight, the child's injuries looked even more severe than they had by the roadside. Purple bruises mottled his pale skin, and dried blood caked his sandy hair. But it was the boy's clothes that puzzled Elias' most expensive sneakers. Designer jeans and a jacket that probably cost more than most Amish families spent on clothing in a year. "Twin boys home?" Elias asked as Sarah returned with an armload of clean white cotton. "In the barn, finishing the milking," she replied, then gasped as she got her first clear look at their unexpected guest. "Papa, who would do this to a child?" Before Elias could answer, the sound of a buggy approaching drew his attention to the window. Bishop Lapp climbed down from his modest carriage with the deliberate movements of a man whose 73 years had taught him the value of patience. Behind him came Deacon Ezra Miller, 45 years old and possessed of a practical wisdom that complemented the bishop's spiritual guidance. "Elias," Bishop Lapp said as he entered without knocking, a privilege earned through decades of friendship and spiritual counsel. "Samuel mentioned you found someone in need." The bishop's weathered face showed no surprise at the scene before him. In his 5 decades of ministry, he had overseen the community through droughts, diseases, and the occasional collision with the outside world that inevitably tested their commitment to simple living and peaceful ways. "English boy," Elias explained, using the Amish term for anyone outside their faith community. "Beaten terrible. Don't know who he is or how he got here." Deacon Miller knelt beside the bed, his experienced eyes cataloging the injuries with the practiced assessment of a man who had tended wounded animals and people alike. "These aren't accidental hurts," he said grimly. "Someone did this on purpose." As if summoned by some unspoken signal, the rest of the Stoltzfus family appeared. 16-year-old twins Samuel and Jacob entered together, their identical faces showing the somber maturity that came from growing up in a community where children learned early that life held both beauty and sorrow. They had their father's build and their mother's gentle eyes, though Samuel tended toward quiet contemplation, while Jacob possessed a more adventurous spirit. "Is he going to be all right?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Bishop Lapp placed a gentle hand on the boy's forehead, his touch carrying decades of experience in ministering to the sick and wounded. "He has fever, but his breathing is steady. The Lord has brought him to us for a reason." Sarah had already begun the familiar ritual of care that Martha had taught her, warming water in the kitchen, gathering the dried herbs that still hung in neat bundles from the rafters, preparing the poultices and teas that had served their community for generations. The absence of Martha felt particularly sharp in moments like these, when her healing knowledge and gentle presence would have been most needed. "Tell us about your mother's remedies," Elias said to Sarah, recognizing her need to fill the silence with purpose. It was a request he'd made many times since Martha's death 3 years ago, finding comfort in hearing his daughter recite the wisdom that connected them to the woman they'd lost. "Willow bark tea for fever and pain," Sarah recited as she worked, her voice taking on the cadence of a prayer. "Comfrey leaves for wounds that need mending. Lavender to ease troubled sleep." She paused, looking at the unconscious boy. "And patience, because healing takes time and cannot be rushed." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Martha had often said that healing was as much about creating space for recovery as it was about treating symptoms. Their simple home, with its atmosphere of quiet faith and unconditional acceptance, had always been a place where the wounded, whether animal or human, seemed to find peace down as Sarah tended to the boy's visible injuries. Elias found himself remembering his own childhood trauma. He had been 8 when his parents died in a buggy accident, leaving him orphaned and struggling with nightmares that lasted for months. The community had wrapped around him like a warm quilt, each family taking turns providing comfort until his uncle and aunt formally adopted him. The memory reminded him why he couldn't simply turn this injured child over to authorities without first ensuring his safety. "We should call the English police," Deacon Miller said, voicing the practical concern that hung unspoken in the room. "A hurt child, beaten like this, there will be questions." Bishop Lapp nodded slowly. "Truth will come in its own time. For now, we tend to immediate needs." The boy stirred slightly, and everyone in the room held their breath. His eyes fluttered, opened briefly, startling blue against his pale skin before closing again. In that brief moment, Elias glimpsed something that made his heart ache, a fear so deep it seemed to live in the child's bones. "He's scared," Sarah whispered, as if reading her father's thoughts. "Even unconscious, he's afraid." Elias reached into his wife's memory chest and withdrew something he hadn't touched in months, a POI's simple wooden cross that Martha had kept beside their bed. She'd carved it herself during their courtship, and it had been present for every significant moment of their marriage, their wedding night, the births of their children, and finally during her last peaceful hours before cancer claimed her. Without ceremony, he placed the cross on the small table beside the boy's bed. It wasn't meant as a religious statement so much as an offering of the protection and peace that this house had always provided to those who needed shelter. "His clothes," Jacob observed, touching the fabric of the boy's jacket with curious fingers. "This is expensive stuff, like what the tourists wear when they come looking at our farms." Samuel nodded in agreement. "And look at his shoes. Those cost more than Papa spends on our whole family for boots." The observation raised questions that none of them voiced aloud. What was a wealthy child doing alone and injured in their rural community? How had he ended up by the old stone bridge, miles from any main road that tourists typically traveled? As the night deepened, they settled into the rhythm of vigil that felt as natural as breathing. Bishop Lapp led them in quiet prayers, not asking for miracles, but for wisdom and strength to provide whatever care the boy needed. Deacon Miller helped Sarah prepare a strengthening broth from vegetables grown in their own garden. The twins took turns monitoring the boy's breathing and temperature. Elias found himself thinking about Martha's approach to healing. She had always insisted that recovery involved more than treating physical symptoms. It required creating an environment where the whole person could feel safe enough to let their guard down and begin the process of restoration. Looking at this frightened child, he suspected that emotional healing might be even more important than mending his visible wounds. We should take shifts, he decided. Someone should be with him through the night, in case he wakes afraid. Without discussion, they organized themselves into a schedule that would ensure the boy was never alone. It was the same instinctive care they'd provided to countless injured animals over the years, extended now to a human child who had somehow found his way to their door as the others prepared for their watches. Elias remained beside the bed, studying the boy's face in the gentle lamplight. Beneath the bruises and swelling, he could see the ghost of what this child must have looked like before violence touched his life. Probably quick to smile, maybe mischievous, definitely loved by someone who was now frantically searching for him. The thought made Elias's chest tighten with protective instincts. He hadn't felt this strongly since his own children were small. Whatever had brought this boy to their farm, whatever danger he was fleeing, Elias knew with quiet certainty that they would not abandon him. The Stoltzfus family had been shaped by loss and strengthened by community support. They understood that sometimes strangers became family, and family meant protection, no matter the cost. Outside, the familiar sounds of evening settled over the farm cattle lowing softly in the pasture, the whisper of wind through the corn, and the distant call of an owl beginning its nightly hunt. Inside, the ancient rhythm of caring for someone in need continued, connecting this moment to countless others when their community had opened its doors to those who needed shelter from the storms of life. Dawn arrived with the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning mist that hung over the Stoltz farm. Elias looked up from the milking stool where he'd been sitting since before sunrise, watching the boys sleep fitfully through the night. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to shake the very foundations of their peaceful world. 5 black helicopters descended from the gray sky like mechanical vultures, their downdraft flattening the tall grass and sending chickens squawking toward the safety of the barn. Elias had never seen anything like it, military precision in his pasture, uniformed figures rappelling down ropes with practiced efficiency. "Stay with the boy," he told Sarah, who had rushed to the window at the first sound of the approaching aircraft. His voice remained steady despite the churning in his stomach. In 47 years of simple living, nothing had prepared him for this moment. The lead figure approaching his front door was a woman in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled back severely and her brown eyes sharp with authority. She moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being in charge, her hand resting casually near the weapon holstered at her side. "Mr. Stoltzfus, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI," she announced, displaying a badge that caught the morning light. "We need to speak with you about the child you found yesterday evening." Elias stepped onto his front porch, closing the door firmly behind him. The simple gesture felt like drawing a line in the earth, one side representing everything he'd spent, his life protecting, the other containing forces he didn't understand but instinctively distrusted. "How do you know about the boy?" he asked, his voice carrying the measured calm that had served him well through decades of dealing with difficult situations. "We've been tracking him," Agent Martinez replied, her tone professional but not unkind. "He's been missing for 3 days. We need to take him into protective custody immediately." By now, neighbors had begun arriving with the quiet efficiency that characterized Amish community response to crisis. They came on foot and in buggies, drawn by some invisible signal that trouble had found one of their own. Bishop Lapp appeared, first, followed by the Byler and Yoder families, then others, until nearly 30 adults stood in silent solidarity around Elias's farmyard. "The boy's hurt," Elias said simply. "He needs care, not questions." Agent Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Stoltzfus, I understand your concern, but this child is in extreme danger. His name is Tommy Castellano, and he's a federal witness under our protection. People are actively hunting him." The name meant nothing to Elias, but the fear in the agent's voice spoke volumes. He glanced at Bishop Lapp, seeking guidance from the man who had shepherded their community through countless challenges. "What kind of danger?" the bishop asked, his weathered face showing the wisdom of someone who had learned to ask the right questions. Agent Martinez hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. His father testified against a powerful crime family. Tommy witnessed his mother's murder 2 years ago. The safe house where we were hiding them was compromised yesterday. Tommy escaped during the attack that killed his protective detail. The words hit Elias like physical blows. A 10-year-old child had watched his mother die, had been living in hiding for 2 years, and had somehow found his way to their peaceful corner of the world while running for his life. The Torino crime family has placed $1 million bounty on Tommy's head. Agent Martinez continued, her voice dropping to emphasize the gravity of the situation. Professional killers are already en route to this area. Every moment he remains here puts your entire community at risk. Samuel and Jacob had joined the growing crowd, their young faces pale with the realization that their simple act of mercy had somehow drawn them into a deadly game they didn't understand. Other families whispered among themselves in Pennsylvania Dutch, their concerned voices creating a low murmur of anxiety. From inside the house came a sound that cut through all the adult conversation, a child's terrified scream. Elias turned immediately toward the door, but Agent Martinez moved to block his path. "Let me handle this," she said firmly. "Tommy knows me. He trusts me." But Elias had already pushed past her, his paternal instincts overriding any concern for federal authority. He found the boy Tommy sitting up in bed, his blue eyes wild with terror as he stared at the unfamiliar faces crowding around the windows. Sarah sat beside him, trying to offer comfort with her gentle presence. "Please don't let them take me," Tommy whispered, his small hand clutching Sarah's arm with desperate strength. "The bad men found me again." The child's plea hit Elias squarely in the chest. He looked into those terrified blue eyes and saw his own children at that age, trusting him to keep them safe from everything frightening in the world. The fact that this boy had endured unimaginable trauma, yet still possessed enough faith to ask for protection, spoke to something fundamental in Elias's understanding of right and wrong. Agent Martinez entered the room with careful movements, her professional demeanor softening as she approached the bed. "Tommy, it's Agent Martinez. You're safe now. These are good people who helped you." Tommy's grip on Sarah's arm loosened slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on Elias with an intensity that seemed far too mature for his age. "Are you going to make me leave?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Elias believed about protecting the innocent. Around him, he could feel the weight of his community's expectations, their unspoken trust that he would make the decision that honored their values while keeping them safe. "The boy stays until he's healed," Elias heard himself say, the words emerging with quiet authority. "Then we'll see." Agent Martinez's face flushed with frustration. "Mr. Stoltzfus, you don't understand the danger you're inviting. These people don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. If they find Tommy here, they'll kill anyone who gets in their way." Bishop Lapp spoke from the doorway, his voice carrying the weight of spiritual authority. "We have hidden runaway slaves. We have sheltered refugees from war. This child needs protection, and we do not abandon those who seek sanctuary among us." The standoff continued for several long minutes, federal authority facing off against community. Conviction. Finally, Agent Martinez reached into her jacket and withdrew a small electronic device. "This was sewn into Tommy's jacket lining," she said, holding up what looked like a partially melted FBI identification badge. "It's how we've been tracking him. But it also means anyone else with the right equipment can find him." The implication struck Elias immediately. The boy hadn't simply wandered into their community by accident. He'd been led here by technology that could just as easily guide his enemies to their door. 24 hours, Agent Martinez said, recognizing that she wasn't going to win this argument through force. "Give me 24 hours to arrange secure transport and a new safe house. After that, I can't guarantee his safety or yours." Tommy looked up at Elias with eyes that held far too much knowledge of betrayal and loss. "Will you stay with me? Until they take me away?" Elias sat down on the edge of the bed, his weathered hand gently smoothing the boy's tangled hair. "I'll stay," he promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. As Agent Martinez and her team established a perimeter around the farm, Elias remained beside Tommy's bed, watching the child finally relax into peaceful sleep. Outside, his community continued their quiet vigil, understanding without words that they had chosen to place themselves between an innocent child and forces that would stop at nothing to destroy him. The decision felt both terrifying and absolutely right, the kind of choice that defined who they were as a people and what they were willing to sacrifice to remain true to their deepest beliefs. Whatever consequences followed, Elias knew he would face them with the same quiet certainty that had guided him through every other crisis in his life. The boy was under their protection now, and that protection would not be given lightly or withdrawn easily, regardless of what dangers emerged from the shadows to test their resolve. The first night after the helicopters left felt like holding one's breath underwater. Elias sat in the wooden chair beside Tommy's bed, listening to the boy's fevered murmurs and the unfamiliar sounds of federal agents moving through his property. Agent Martinez had positioned her team around the farm's perimeter, their presence both reassuring and deeply unsettling to a community that had lived for generations without locks on their doors. Tommy's fever broke just before dawn, his small body finally relaxing into deeper sleep. When his eyes opened, they were clearer than they'd been since Elias found him, though still shadowed with wariness that no child should possess. "You stayed," Tommy whispered, his voice hoarse but surprised, as if adults keeping their promises was an unusual occurrence in his experience. "I said I would," Elias replied simply, offering the boy a cup of Sarah's chamomile tea. "How are you feeling?" Tommy struggled to sit up, wincing as movement reminded him of his injuries. "Better, I think." The scary dream stopped. He looked around the simple room with its plain wooden furniture and handmade quilts. "This place feels safe." Sarah appeared in the doorway, carrying a breakfast tray, scrambled eggs from their own chickens, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and milk so rich it carried the sweetness of summer grass. She moved with the quiet efficiency Martha had taught her, understanding that healing required nourishment for both body and soul. "Thank you," Tommy said to Sarah, his manner suggesting a careful upbringing despite everything he'd endured. "My mama used to make eggs like this." The mention of his mother hung in the air between them, a reminder of losses too profound for easy comfort. Sarah simply nodded and began helping him eat, her gentle presence offering the kind of maternal care that transcended words. Outside, Elias could hear the rumble of buggies arriving for the emergency community meeting Bishop Lapp had called. The decision to shelter Tommy affected everyone, and their tradition demanded that such choices be made collectively, with full understanding of the consequences. "I need to speak with the other families," Elias told Tommy. "Sarah will stay with you. If you need anything, just ask." Tommy's eyes widened with sudden fear. "You're not leaving me with the government people, are you?" "No. Elias said firmly. "I'm just going to talk with my neighbors about how we can best help you." The community meeting took place in the Byler barn, the largest covered space available. 43 adults gathered in a circle on bales of hay, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Agent Martinez stood at the edge of the group, her presence tolerated but not welcomed. "The boy has enemies," old Jonas Yoder said without preamble. "Dangerous enemies who kill for money. Is one child's life worth risking our entire community?" The question sparked immediate discussion, voices rising in Pennsylvania Dutch as families wrestled with competing values. The Amish commitment to protecting the innocent ran as deep as their dedication to pacifism, but they also bore responsibility for their own children's safety. "We helped runaway slaves," Deacon Miller reminded them, his voice carrying the weight of historical precedent. "Our grandfathers risked everything to hide people running from those who would hurt them. This is no different." "It is different," Anna King countered, her worry evident in every word. "The slave catchers didn't have helicopters and machine guns. These criminals Agent Martinez describes, they won't honor our beliefs about nonviolence." "Bishop?" Lapp listened to every voice before speaking, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap. "Fear is a poor foundation for moral decisions," he said finally. "If we turn away this child because of what might happen, we become something less than what God calls us to be." Agent Martinez cleared her throat, requesting permission to address the group. "I understand your desire to help Tommy, but you need to know what you're facing. The Torino family operates like a military organization. They have resources, training, and absolutely no regard for innocent life. Tell us about the boy." Sarah's voice came from the barn doorway, where she'd been, listening despite being told to stay with Tommy. "Tell us about his family, what he's been through." Agent Martinez's professional facade softened as she looked at the young woman whose protective instincts clearly extended to their unexpected guest. Tommy's father, Michael Castellano, was Vincent Torino's accountant for 15 years. He knew where the bodies were buried literally. When his wife was murdered as a warning to keep quiet, Michael decided to testify. She paused, gathering herself before continuing. "Tommy witnessed his mother's death. He was hiding in a closet when they came for her. For 2 years, we've moved him from safe house to safe house, trying to keep him alive until his father's testimony could put Torino away permanently." "And now?" Bishop Lapp asked gently. "The trial starts in 6 weeks. If Tommy testifies about what he saw, Torino goes to prison for life. If he doesn't, if something happens to him, Torino walks free." The weight of responsibility settled over the group like morning fog. They weren't just protecting one traumatized child. They were potentially the last line of defense between justice and a monster who had already destroyed one family and would undoubtedly destroy others. Samuel and Jacob exchanged glances across the circle, a silent communication that their father recognized from years of watching his twins navigate decisions together. "We want to help," Samuel said finally. "Tommy's just a kid. He shouldn't have to be afraid all the time." Jacob nodded agreement. "And if bad people are looking for him, they might hurt other children while they're searching. Protecting Tommy protects everyone." The simple wisdom of youth cut through the adults' complex concerns. Elder Amos Byler, who had initially opposed harboring the boy, found himself reconsidering. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the Lord brought this child to us because we are the only ones who can keep him truly safe." "How?" Agent Martinez asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "You have no weapons, no security systems, no way to fight back. If they find him, we have something better," Bishop Lapp replied with quiet conviction. "We have a community that looks after its own, and eyes that see strangers long before they mean harm." As the meeting continued, Tommy made his way slowly to the barn, leaning heavily on Sarah's arm but determined to hear what was being decided about his fate. He slipped inside just as the discussion turned to practical matters, where he would stay, how they would watch for danger, what story they would tell if outsiders asked questions. "I can draw pictures," Tommy said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the adult conversation. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised by his presence and his words. "If you want to know what the bad men look like, I can draw them. I remember faces really good." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small sketchbook, its pages filled with disturbing images that spoke to the trauma he carried. But among the dark drawings were others detailed portraits of faces, buildings, even cars, all rendered with surprising skill for a 10-year-old. "I drew everyone at the safe house," Tommy explained, his voice growing stronger. "The agents, the people who brought food, even the man who read the gas meter. Mama said I had a gift for remembering things." Agent Martinez looked at the sketches with growing amazement. "Tommy, these are incredibly detailed. Some of these faces, I recognize them from our case files." The revelation changed everything. Tommy wasn't just a witness to be protected. He was a living repository of information that could help identify anyone who posed a threat. His artistic gift, born from trauma, had become a weapon in the fight for his own survival. "Then it's settled," Elias said, looking around the circle, of faces that had become family through decades of shared faith and mutual support. "Tommy stays with us. We protect him, and he helps us recognize danger before it arrives." The decision felt both momentous and inevitable, like stepping off a cliff while trusting that solid ground would appear beneath their feet. 3 days into their vigil, the nightmares came back with a vengeance. Tommy's screams pierced the quiet farmhouse at 2 a.m, jolting Elias from his restless sleep in the chair beside the boy's bed. The child thrashed against his blankets, his young voice crying out words that chilled Elias to the bone. "Uncle Vinny, no. Please don't hurt Mama. She didn't do anything wrong." Elias reached for Tommy gently, careful not to startle him further. The boy's skin burned with fever, born of terror rather than infection, his small body rigid with remembered horror. Without thinking, Elias retrieved Martha's prayer shawl from the cedar chest at the foot of his own bed, a hand-woven creation of soft blue wool that still carried the faintest scent of lavender from her garden. He wrapped the shawl around Tommy's trembling shoulders, and the effect was immediate. The boy's breathing slowed, his clenched fists relaxed, and the wild fear in his eyes began to subside. "My mama had a blanket like this," Tommy whispered, his fingers clutching the soft wool. "She used to wrap me up when the thunder scared me." "This was my wife's," Elias said quietly. "She made it when our first child was born. She always said it had healing in the weaving." Tommy pulled the shawl closer, burying his face in its comforting softness. "Will you tell me about her?" "Your wife?" For the next hour, Elias shared memories of Martha, her laugh that could fill a room, her endless patience with hurt animals, her belief that every person carried a spark of divine light that deserved protection. As he spoke, Tommy's breathing gradually returned to normal, and the terror-haunted look began to fade from his young face. "She sounds like my mama," Tommy said finally. "Mama used to say that God puts guardian angels in regular people sometimes, so they can help when things get really bad." He looked up at Elias with solemn blue eyes. "I think maybe she was right." The next morning brought disturbing news. Agent Martinez arrived at dawn with intelligence that made her professional composure crack slightly around the edges. "We intercepted communications suggesting Torino's people are using a new approach," she explained to Elias as they stood in his kitchen, speaking in low voices so Tommy wouldn't overhear. "They're posing as child welfare investigators, trying to gain access to Amish schools and community centers." The implications hit Elias immediately. "They're looking for him by targeting our children." 3 different social workers visited Amish schools in neighboring districts yesterday, Agent Martinez confirmed. All had proper credentials, but something felt wrong to the teachers who spoke with them. Too many questions about children who didn't match their supposed case files. Elias felt the protective fury that every parent knows, the primal rage that surfaces when someone threatens the innocent. The idea that these criminals would use their community's children as hunting tools violated everything sacred about childhood. And safety. What do we do? He asked, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. We've quietly moved the most vulnerable children to relatives in distant communities, Agent Martinez replied. But Tommy can't be moved easily. His injuries are healing, but the psychological trauma runs deep. Disrupting his sense of safety now could set back his recovery for months. As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy appeared in the kitchen. Doorway, wrapped in Martha's prayer shawl and looking small despite his 10 years. Sarah followed close behind, her protective instincts clearly engaged. Papa Eli, Tommy said, using the name he'd adopted for Elias 3 days earlier. I had another dream, but this one was different. Tell me, Elias encouraged, kneeling down. To Tommy's eye level, I dreamed about Uncle Vinny's office. He had a big safe behind a painting of boats. Daddy used to take pictures of the papers inside that safe when Uncle Vinny wasn't looking. Tommy's young face grew serious. In my dream, I remembered where Daddy hid those pictures. Agent Martinez stepped forward, her training warring with her desire not to re-traumatize the child. Tommy, where do you think your father hid the photographs? In Mama's jewelry box, Tommy said with the simple certainty that children bring to important truths. She had a secret compartment in the bottom where she kept letters from her mama. Daddy showed me once, said it was the safest place in our house because Uncle Vinny would never think to look there. The revelation struck Agent Martinez like lightning. Tommy, where is your mother's jewelry box now? The FBI took all our stuff after Mama died, Tommy replied. But I don't think they knew about the secret part. You have to press this little flower on the side and twist it just right. Agent Martinez was already reaching for her phone, but Tommy's next words stopped her cold. The bad men might know about it now, though, he said quietly. Uncle Vinny came to our house after Mama's funeral. He was looking through all her things, asking Daddy where she kept her important papers. Daddy said he didn't know, but I could tell he was scared. The weight of this new information settled over the kitchen like storm clouds. If Tommy was right, those photographs could provide the evidence needed to convict Vincent Torino permanently. But they could also explain why the crime boss was so desperate to eliminate both father and son. They were the only ones who knew about the hidden evidence. We need to get that jewelry box, Agent Martinez said, thinking aloud. If those photographs are what I think they are, Uncle Vinny will kill anyone who tries to get them. Tommy interrupted, his young voice carrying knowledge no child should possess. He told Daddy that people who steal from him just disappear, and nobody ever finds them again. Sarah knelt beside Tommy, her gentle presence offering comfort without words. You don't have to worry about Uncle Vinny anymore, she said firmly. You're part of our family now, and we protect our own. Tommy looked up at her with desperate hope. Really? Even if I'm not Amish? Even if I bring danger to your house? Especially then, Elias said, meaning every word. Sometimes families are born, and sometimes they're chosen. Either way, they're forever. The boy began to cry, then not the terrified sobs of his nightmares, but the cleansing tears of someone finally allowing themselves to believe in safety again. Sarah gathered him into her arms, while Martha's prayer shawl provided its quiet comfort. And for a moment, the kitchen felt filled with the kind of love that could indeed work miracles. But outside, Agent Martinez was already coordinating with her superiors about retrieving evidence that could change everything if they could get to it before Vincent Torino's people destroyed it forever. By the end of the first week, it became clear that Tommy needed to be moved to a more secure location within the community. The Byla farm, situated 3 miles deeper into Amish territory and accessible only by winding dirt roads, offered both isolation and a piece of history that seemed particularly appropriate for their current situation. Elder Amos Byler met them at his front gate with a large wrought iron key that looked like it belonged in a museum. The metal was black with age, its elaborate scrollwork speaking to craftsmanship from another century. "This key has been in my family for 4 generations," Amos explained to Tommy as they walked toward the barn. "My great-grandfather used it during the time when people escaping slavery came through our community seeking freedom." Tommy listened with the intense focus he brought to stories about courage and survival. His healing had progressed remarkably. The worst bruises had faded to yellow shadows, and his natural curiosity was beginning to emerge from beneath layers of trauma and fear. "Were they scared?" Tommy asked. "The people who were running away?" "Terrified," Amos replied honestly. "But they were also brave, just like you. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you keep going even when you're afraid." The antique key opened a heavy wooden door set into what appeared to be the barn's foundation. Behind it lay a hidden chamber carved from the earth itself, its walls lined with stone and its ceiling supported by hand-hewn beams. The space was larger than Tommy had expected, easily capable of sheltering a dozen people, with sleeping areas carved into the walls and a ventilation system that drew fresh air from concealed openings. "People live down here?" Tommy asked, his voice echoing slightly in the underground space. "For days, sometimes weeks, while we arranged safe passage north," Amos confirmed. "The last family we hit here was in 1858, a woman and her 3 children, making their way to Canada." Elias watched Tommy explore the historical sanctuary with growing wonder. The boy's resilience continued to amaze him, one moment clinging to Martha's prayer shawl for comfort, the next eagerly examining the ingenious hiding places their ancestors had carved into solid rock. Agent Martinez had been skeptical about the move initially, worried about communication difficulties and escape routes. But after inspecting the underground chamber and its multiple concealed exits, she grudgingly admitted it was more secure than anything the federal government could provide. "The surveillance equipment will have limited range down here," she warned. "If something goes wrong, we might not know until it's too late." "Something's already gone wrong," Elias replied quietly. "We're just trying to make it right." As they settled Tommy into his new hiding place, Sarah taught him simple Amish prayers and songs that had comforted generations of frightened children. Her maternal instincts had awakened fully during the past week, and Elias often caught her looking at Tommy with the protective love of an older sister who would fight the world to keep him safe. "Tomorrow I'll show you how to milk cows," she promised as she tucked him into bed. "And maybe we can gather eggs together. The chickens are funny. They like to hide their eggs in the strangest places." Tommy smiled, the expression transforming, his face from haunted to hopeful. "I've never milked a cow." "Will it hurt?" "Only if you're not gentle," Sarah laughed. "But you have gentle hands. I can tell." Meanwhile, Agent Martinez had received intelligence that made her blood run cold. Vincent Torino's most dangerous enforcer had arrived in Lancaster County that morning, a man known only as Marco the Blade, whose reputation for creative violence had made him legendary among law enforcement agencies. "He's posing as a tourist," she explained to Elias during their evening briefing. "Checking into bed and breakfasts, visiting Amish attractions, taking photographs. But our surveillance shows he's systematically mapping every farm and community center in a 20-mile radius, looking for Tommy." Elias stated the obvious with his characteristic calm. "Looking for patterns," Agent Martinez corrected. "Marco's smart. He knows Tommy has to be somewhere that offers both protection and medical care. He's eliminating possibilities until only the truth remains. The weight of that truth settled heavily between them. Despite all their precautions, despite the community's unified protection, they were being hunted by a professional killer who had never failed to complete an assignment. "There's more," Agent Martinez continued reluctantly. "We've received anonymous threats targeting Amish children specifically. Someone knows Tommy is here, even if they don't know exactly where." The revelation struck Elias like a physical blow. His own community's children, innocent of everything except showing kindness to a stranger, were now targets because of his decision to harbor Tommy. "Bishop Lapp is calling another community meeting," he said after a long moment. "The families have a right to know what we're facing." That evening, as Tommy slept peacefully in his underground sanctuary wrapped in Martha's prayer shawl, the adults grappled with an impossible situation. The threats were real, the danger was escalating, and their simple community found itself at the center of a conflict that challenged everything they believed about peace, protection, and moral responsibility. But in the hidden chamber beneath the boiler barn, something else was happening. Tommy had begun drawing again, not the traumatic images of his nightmares, but careful portraits of his new family. Sarah reading by lamplight, Elias working in the fields, the twins feeding cattle, Bishop Lapp's kind eyes. Each drawing captured not just physical features, but something deeper, the sense of belonging that was slowly healing wounds no medicine could touch. For the first time in 2 years, Tommy was creating art that celebrated life instead of documenting death. When Sarah found the drawings the next morning, she wept with joy and showed them immediately to her father. The pictures revealed a child who was beginning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that good people outnumbered bad ones, and that love could indeed triumph over fear. "He's getting better," she told Elias, her voice thick with emotion. "Whatever happens next, we've given him something precious. We've shown him that families can be safe." Elias nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. In the distance, he could see unfamiliar cars moving slowly along the country roads, their occupants taking pictures and asking questions. Marco the Blade was methodically tightening his net, and soon they would all discover whether love and community solidarity could stand against professional violence and unlimited resources. The antique key in his pocket felt heavier than its actual weight, carrying as it did the responsibility of protecting not just Tommy, but the innocent faith of an entire community that had chosen compassion over safety. 2 weeks into their vigil, Tommy's recovery took an unexpected turn when he began experiencing severe panic attacks. The episodes came without warning. One moment he would be peacefully drawing or helping Sarah with simple chores. The next, he would be hyperventilating and clawing at his jacket with desperate fingers. It was during the third such attack that Sarah discovered what was triggering them. As she tried to calm Tommy's frantic searching through his pockets, her fingers encountered a small, hard object sewn into the jacket's lining. "Papa," she called urgently, her voice cutting through Tommy's panicked gasps. "There's something hidden." In his coat, Elias arrived quickly, finding Tommy in the grip of another flashback, his young voice crying out fragments of terror. "It's still broadcasting. They'll find me." Daddy said never let them find me. With careful hands, Sarah cut through the jacket's inner lining and extracted a small electronic device no bigger than a hearing aid battery. Its surface was scorched from the attack on the safe house, but a tiny red light still blinked with mechanical persistence. Agent Martinez arrived within minutes of Sarah's urgent phone call, her face going pale when she saw the device. "GPS transponder." She breathed, her professional composure cracking. "Military grade. This thing has been broadcasting Tommy's location continuously for 2 weeks." The implications crashed over them like a cold wave. Every safe house, every careful plan, every moment of seeming security had been an illusion. Tommy's father had given him the device as protection, never imagining it would become the very tool that led killers to his son's door. How long before they traced the signal here? Elias asked, his voice maintaining its characteristic calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. They already have, Agent Martinez replied grimly, showing them her phone screen. Satellite data shows at least 3 separate vehicles conducting systematic surveillance of this area. They're not just hunting randomly anymore. They know Tommy is within a 5-mile radius of this farm. The emergency community meeting that followed was unlike any in their collective memory. 47 adults crowded into the boiler barn while their children were quietly evacuated to relatives in distant communities. The decision to scatter their most vulnerable members felt like tearing apart the fabric of their close-knit society. Tommy sat in the center of the gathering, still wrapped in Martha's prayer shawl, his young face showing a maturity that broke Elias's heart. The boy understood that his presence had brought danger to people who had shown him nothing but kindness. "I should go with the FBI lady," Tommy said quietly, his voice carrying across the hushed barn. "I don't want any of your children to get hurt because of me." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they claimed to believe about protecting the innocent. Sarah immediately knelt beside Tommy, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You are one of our children now," she said firmly. "We don't abandon family when things get difficult." Bishop Lapp cleared his throat, commanding attention through simple presence rather than raised voice. "The boy speaks from love, wanting to protect us as we have protected him. But love sometimes requires us to face danger rather than run from it." Elder Jonas Yoder, who had initially opposed harboring Tommy, stood slowly. His weathered face showed the internal struggle between fear and faith that gripped the entire community. "My grandson is 8 years old," he said finally. "The same age I was when my family hid Jewish refugees during the war in Europe. I remember being afraid, but I also remember my father saying that some things are more important than safety." The reference to their community's largely unspoken history during World War II resonated deeply. Several families had quietly sheltered European refugees, never speaking publicly about their role in saving lives, but passing down the stories through generations as examples of faith in action. Agent Martinez stepped forward, her usual professional distance replaced by genuine emotion. "I need to tell you something about my own daughter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's 9 years old. When I look at Tommy, I see her face. I see what I would want someone to do if she were the one running for her life." She paused, gathering herself before continuing. "But I also need to be honest about what we're facing. Vincent Torino has unlimited resources and no conscience. The men he sent here won't be deterred by your faith or your commitment to peace." Samuel and Jacob exchanged glances, and Elias recognized the look that had preceded every major decision they'd made as children. His sons were no longer boys, and their next words proved it. "Some of us learn things during Rumspringa," Samuel said carefully, referring to the traditional period when Amish youth explore the outside world before choosing baptism. "Things that might be useful now," Jacob nodded agreement. "We're not talking about violence, but we know these lands better than any outsider. We know how to move without being seen, how to create confusion, how to protect what matters." The revelation that some of their young men possessed skills beyond traditional farming shouldn't have surprised Elias, but it did. During their years in the English world, his sons and their friends had inevitably absorbed knowledge that could serve purposes their community had never imagined. "What are you suggesting?" Bishop Lapp asked, his tone neither approving nor condemning. "That we stop thinking like victims," Jacob replied with quiet determination. "Tommy's father left evidence that could stop this forever. Instead of just hiding, maybe we should help retrieve it." Agent Martinez's eyes widened. "The jewelry box. You're talking about going after your mother's jewelry box." Tommy looked up from Martha's prayer shawl with sudden hope. If we get Mama's pictures, Uncle Vinny can't hurt anyone else, can he? No, Agent Martinez confirmed. Those photographs would end this permanently. But retrieving them would require going into the most dangerous place imaginable, directly into Torino territory. The barn fell silent as the magnitude of the choice before them became clear. They could continue hiding, hoping their peaceful resistance would outlast professional killers. Or they could take active steps to end the threat forever, accepting risks that violated everything they believed about nonviolence. The boy has suffered enough, Elias said finally, his decision emerging from the same deep well of conviction that had guided every important choice in his life. If there's a way to give him a future free from fear, we have to try. As the meeting continued, Tommy pulled out his sketchbook and began drawing with intense concentration. The image that emerged showed remarkable detail, a map drawn from a 10-year-old's memory, but accurate, enough to guide adults through a world of violence toward evidence that could save them all. The man who emerged from the cornfield at dawn looked like a ghost returning from the dead. Tommy saw him first through the small window of the underground chamber, and his reaction was unlike anything Elias had witnessed, not fear, but explosive. Joy mixed with disbelief. "Daddy!" Tommy's cry echoed through the stone chamber as he scrambled up the ladder faster than his healing body should have allowed. Michael Castellano stood at the edge of the Byler farm, thin and haggard, but unmistakably alive. His clothes were torn. His face bore the weathered look of a man who had been living rough for weeks, but his eyes burned with the desperate intensity of a father who had moved heaven and earth to reach his son. The reunion nearly broke Elias's heart. Tommy threw himself into his father's arms with such force that both of them staggered, clinging to each other as if physical contact could make up for weeks of assumed loss and grief. Michael buried his face in his son's hair, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "I thought you were dead," Tommy whispered, his small hands fisting in his father's jacket. "Agent Martinez said the bad man killed you." "I had to let them think that," Michael replied, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. "It was the only way to protect you, to get close enough to end this forever." Agent Martinez arrived at the farm within minutes, her hand hovering near her weapon until she confirmed Michael's identity. But instead of relief, her face showed confusion and something approaching fear. "Michael, you're supposed to be in federal custody," she said carefully. "The safe house attack, we recovered your body." "You recovered the body of Agent Wilson, who died trying to protect my son," Michael corrected, his voice hardening. "I've been watching, Agent Martinez. Watching and learning some very interesting things about how the Torino family always seems to know where we're going to be." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Elias felt the familiar chill that came with recognizing that a situation was far more complex and dangerous than it had initially appeared. "What are you suggesting?" Agent Martinez asked, but her voice lacked the outrage that should have accompanied such an accusation. Michael reached into his jacket and withdrew a small tablet computer, its screen showing what appeared to be surveillance footage. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm showing you proof." The video was grainy but clear enough to make out faces and actions. It showed the interior of what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, with Agent Martinez sitting across from a man in an expensive suit. They were clearly having an intimate conversation, and money was changing hands. "That's Vincent Torino's nephew, Danny," Michael explained to the gathered group. "This footage was taken 6 months ago, 3 weeks before our first safe house was compromised." Agent Martinez's face had gone pale, but she didn't deny the evidence. Instead, she sank onto a hay bale with the defeated posture of someone whose deepest secrets had been exposed. "They have my daughter," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Jessica is 9 years old. They took her from school and showed me. Pictures of what they'd do to her if I didn't cooperate. The revelation shifted everything. Elias looked at the federal agent with new understanding, not as a corrupt official, but as another parent trapped in an impossible situation, forced to choose between one child's safety and another's. "How long?" Bishop Lapp asked gently, his voice carrying pastoral concern rather than judgment. 4 months, Agent Martinez replied, tears finally breaking through her professional composure. Every time I thought about refusing, they'd send me a new picture of Jessica. At school, at the playground, in her own bedroom. They made it clear that cooperation was the only thing keeping her alive. Tommy had been listening with the intense focus he brought to adult conversations that affected his safety. Now he stepped forward, still holding his father's hand, but looking directly at Agent Martinez with compassion that seemed impossibly mature for his age. "Uncle Vinny does that," he said quietly. "He makes people hurt other people by threatening the ones they love. That's how he made Daddy work for him for so long." Michael nodded grimly. Vincent Torino understands that good people will do terrible things to protect their children. He's built his entire organization around that principle. Agent Martinez looked up at Tommy with wonder and shame warring in her expression. "You should hate me. Because of what I've done, you've been running for your life for weeks." "I don't hate you," Tommy replied with simple sincerity. "You were trying to save your little girl, just like my daddy was trying to save me. Sometimes there aren't any good choices." The wisdom in those words struck everyone present. This 10-year-old boy, who had endured more trauma than most adults could survive, was offering forgiveness to someone who had betrayed him because he understood the impossible pressures that drove good people to make terrible decisions. Michael opened his tablet. Again, accessing additional files. "Rebecca, I have something that might help both our children. The real reason I've been hiding isn't just to protect Tommy. It's because I've been gathering evidence. Evidence that proves Torino ordered your daughter's kidnapping. Evidence that shows exactly how his organization operates." He showed them photographs, recorded conversations, and financial records that painted a comprehensive picture of the Torino crime family's methods. But most importantly, he had documented proof that Agent Martinez had been coerced into cooperation rather than corrupted by greed. "This changes everything," Agent Martinez breathed, studying the evidence that could potentially clear her name while destroying her tormentors. "There's more," Michael continued. "I know where they're holding Jessica. Same compound where they took Tommy's mother. If we can get the evidence from Elena's jewelry box, we'll have enough to bring down the entire organization and free both our children from this nightmare." The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Instead of continuing to hide and hoping the threat would eventually pass, they would go on the offensive. Michael would use his inside knowledge to guide a rescue mission that would retrieve both the evidence and Agent Martinez's daughter. "It's suicide," Agent Martinez protested. "That compound is a fortress. They have armed guards, surveillance, systems attack dogs. They also have arrogance," Michael interrupted. "They think I'm dead, and Tommy is hiding somewhere helpless. They're not expecting a coordinated assault, especially not one that includes federal agents working with Amish farmers." Samuel and Jacob exchanged glances, and Elias recognized the look that preceded their most daring childhood adventures. "We know these woods better than any security system," Samuel said. "And some things we learned during Rumspringa might be more useful than anyone expects." As the unlikely alliance took shape, a desperate father, a compromised federal agent, and a peaceful community pushed beyond their limits, Tommy made one final contribution to the plan. He opened his sketchbook to a detailed drawing that showed the interior layout of his mother's house, including the location of her bedroom and the exact position of the jewelry box that contained evidence powerful enough to end their ordeal forever. "I drew this while Daddy was making his phone calls," Tommy explained. "I wanted to remember everything about where Mama lived, so I'd never forget her." The drawing would serve as their roadmap into the heart of danger, guided by a child's love for his murdered mother and colored by hope that justice might finally triumph over fear. As night fell over Lancaster County, Elias found himself standing in his father's old workshop, holding a leather-bound journal he'd discovered that afternoon. The book had been hidden beneath loose floorboards for over 40 years, waiting for a moment when its contents might provide guidance for an impossible moral decision. The journal belonged to his father, Elias Stoltzfus, and its pages revealed a secret that transformed everything Elias thought he knew about his family's commitment to pacifism. Written in his father's careful handwriting were detailed accounts of service as a combat medic during World War II, not as a conscientious objector in civilian service, but as a uniformed soldier who had carried wounded men from battlefields across Europe. Sometimes, his father had written, "Protecting innocent life requires us to step into places where death dwells. The Lord forgives those who act from love rather than hatred, even when their actions seem to contradict his commandments." About peace. The words felt like a message across time, providing the moral foundation Elias needed for what they were about to attempt. His father had faced the same terrible choice between absolute pacifism and active protection of the innocent, and had chosen a path that honored both principles without fully satisfying either. Outside the workshop, the strangest coalition in Lancaster County history was preparing for a mission that would test every belief they held sacred. Samuel and Jacob worked with quiet efficiency, their Rumspringa experiences having taught them skills their community had never imagined they might need. "Electronic surveillance systems have blind spots," Samuel explained as he showed Agent Martinez a hand-drawn map of approach routes. "During my time in Philadelphia, I learned how security companies install their equipment. They protect against obvious threats, but often miss the simple ones." Jacob nodded, adding his own expertise. "The compound backs up to Bequia Creek. I spent 2 summers working construction in that area during my time away. The creek bed provides natural cover and access to within 50 yards of the main building." Agent Martinez studied their intelligence with growing amazement. These young men, who appeared to be simple farmers, possessed detailed knowledge of tactics, surveillance, and terrain that rivaled her FBI training. "What else did you learn during your time away?" she asked. "Enough," Samuel replied simply, his tone suggesting depths of experience he preferred not to detail. Meanwhile, Tommy sat with Sarah in the underground chamber, wrapped in Martha's Prayer, shawl and working on what might be his most important drawing yet. Using his remarkable memory for detail, he was creating a comprehensive floor plan of the Torino compound from his brief time there during his mother's funeral. "The guards always stood here and here," he explained, pointing to positions on his sketch. "And Uncle Vinny's office is on the 2nd floor, but you have to go through his bedroom to get to it. That's where he keeps the safe behind the painting of boats." Sarah watched him work with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Tommy's artistic gifts, born from trauma but nurtured by love, were now being used to plan a rescue mission that could save 2 children's lives. "Are you scared?" she asked gently. Tommy considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all emotional inquiries. "A little," he admitted, "but mostly I'm excited. If this works, Jessica and I can both be normal kids again. We can go to school and play and not worry about bad men anymore." The simplicity of his hopes, normalcy, safety, childhood reminded Sarah why they were risking everything. Children shouldn't have to live in fear, shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult conflicts, shouldn't have to run from people who would hurt them simply to send messages to their parents. Bishop Lapp arrived as the final preparations were being completed, his presence both blessing and reality check. The spiritual leader of their community had wrestled with the moral implications of their plan throughout the afternoon, seeking guidance through prayer and meditation. "I cannot officially sanction what you're about to do," he told the assembled group. "Our commitment to peace runs too deep for that. But I also cannot stand by while children suffer when we have the power to help them." He approached Elias and placed weathered hands on his shoulders. "Your father was a good man who made difficult choices in difficult times. Whatever you decide tonight, know that the community will stand with you." Agent Martinez had spent the hours since Michael's revelation coordinating with her few trusted colleagues in the FBI. The evidence Michael had gathered was being transmitted to her supervisor, creating a parallel investigation that would provide backup if their rescue mission succeeded. "Federal agents will move on to Reno's other properties simultaneously," she explained. "If we can get the evidence from Elena's jewelry box and proof that Jessica is being held against her will, we can bring down his entire organization in one coordinated strike." Michael had been quiet through most of the planning, the weight of seeing his son again after weeks of believing him dead still settling in his bones. Now he stepped forward with the final piece of their strategy. "There's something I haven't told you about Vincent Torino," he said, his voice carrying the gravity of someone about to reveal a dangerous secret. "He has a weakness that most people don't know about. He's terrified of children." The admission surprised everyone. Vincent Torino's reputation painted him as a man without conscience or vulnerability. When he was 8 years old, his younger sister died in a fire that he accidentally started, Michael continued. He spent his entire life trying to avoid being around children because they remind him of his guilt. That's why he never comes to the compound when Jessica is there. He can't handle being in the same building as a frightened child. Agent Martinez looked up sharply. "Are you saying he won't be there tonight?" "I'm saying that if a child is in immediate danger, Vincent Torino will do anything to avoid being present. It's his one predictable behavior." The revelation changed their tactical approach entirely. Instead of planning around the crime boss's presence, they could use his psychological weakness to ensure his absence. "Tommy," Agent Martinez said, turning to the boy who had become the center of all their efforts. "This plan depends on you being brave one more time. Are you ready for that?" Tommy straightened his shoulders, Martha's prayer shawl draped around him like armor made of love and memory. "I'm ready. Jessica needs help, and I know how to help her." As midnight approached, Elias found himself standing in the same spot where he'd discovered Tommy weeks earlier by the old stone bridge where this entire ordeal had begun. The boy who had been broken and bleeding in that exact location was now part of a rescue mission to save another child from the same fate. The symmetry felt like providence, as if everything that had happened had been building toward this moment of choice between passive righteousness and active protection. His father's journal rested in his jacket pocket, its weight both burden and comfort. Sarah appeared beside him, her presence as calming as her mother's had always been. "Mama would be proud of what we're doing," she said quietly. "Your mother would be terrified and proud in equal measure," Elias replied, meaning every word. "Just like I am." In the distance, vehicles were arriving to transport their unlikely rescue team toward a confrontation that would either free 2 children from a nightmare or destroy the peaceful life his community had built over generations. But looking at Tommy's determined face in the moonlight, wrapped in Martha's prayer shawl and ready to face his greatest fears to help someone else, Elias knew they had already won the most important victory. Whatever happened next, they had proven that love could transform ordinary people into heroes, that communities could stand against evil, and that sometimes the greatest act of faith was refusing to accept that innocent children should suffer simply because powerful men found their pain useful. The mission ahead would test everything they believed about courage, family, and the price of protecting what mattered most. but they would face it together, guided by a child's unwavering conviction that good people should help each other, no matter the cost. The Torino compound crouched in the darkness like a predator waiting to strike. From their position in the creek bed 50 yards away, Elias could see the sprawling estate that had become a fortress-high walls topped with razor wire, guard towers equipped with searchlights, and a constant patrol of armed men who moved with military precision in his pocket. Martha's simple gold wedding ring pressed against his fingers as he touched it for courage. The band had never left his possession since her death, and tonight it felt like carrying a piece of her strength into the Valley of Shadows. Martha had always believed that love was the most powerful force in the universe, capable of moving mountains and melting the hardest hearts. Tonight, faith would be tested against professional violence and organized evil. Samuel and Jacob moved through the darkness with surprising skill, their knowledge of security systems proving invaluable as they identified patrol patterns and surveillance blind spots. Agent Martinez followed close behind, her federal training adapting to terrain and tactics unlike anything she'd encountered in traditional law enforcement. 2 guards at the rear entrance, Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible above the creek's gentle murmur. They change positions every 20 minutes, but there's a gap in coverage when they pass each other. Michael crouched beside Tommy, both father and son studying the compound where Elena Castellano had lived her final months before Vincent Torino decided she knew too much to survive. Tommy's detailed drawings had proven remarkably accurate. Every window, every door, every security feature exactly where his young memory had placed them. Mama's room is on the 2nd floor. 3rd window from the left, Tommy confirmed, pointing to the darkened building. The jewelry box is in her closet, on the shelf behind her dresses. The mission plan was elegant in its simplicity. Samuel and Jacob would create a diversion at the front gate, drawing guard attention away from the main building. Agent Martinez and Michael would enter through the rear, locate both the evidence and Jessica, while Elias remained with Tommy as backup and emergency coordinator. But as they prepared to move, everything changed. Marco the Blade Torino emerged from the main building with 3 armed associates, their presence immediately altering the tactical situation. The professional killer's reputation preceded him, a man who had never failed to complete an assignment and who found creative satisfaction in the suffering of his victims. "They know we're coming," Agent Martinez breathed, her training recognizing the purposeful movements of a counter-ambush operation. Michael shook his head grimly. "They don't know we're coming. They know Tommy is close, and they're preparing to hunt him." Marco's team began spreading out with practiced efficiency, their movements suggesting a systematic search pattern that would eventually discover any hiding place within a mile radius. The professional killers carried equipment that glowed with infrared signatures, night vision goggles, thermal imaging devices, and weapons designed for silent elimination. "We abort," Agent Martinez whispered urgently. "This is suicide now." But Tommy was already moving, his small form slipping away from the adult's protective circle with the fluid grace of a child who had learned to survive by being invisible. Elias lunged forward to stop him, but Tommy was already beyond reach, making his way toward the compound with desperate courage. "I have to save Jessica," he called back softly. "She's just a little kid. She shouldn't be alone with scary people." The words galvanized the entire team. This 10-year-old boy, who had every reason to fear Marco and his associates, was choosing to walk directly into mortal danger because another child needed protection. His example shamed any adult consideration of retreat or safety. Elias found himself following Tommy without conscious decision, Martha's ring burning against his fingers like a talisman of protective love. Behind him, he heard Agent Martinez curse quietly in Spanish before signaling the others to adjust their approach. The first confrontation occurred in the mansion's kitchen, where Marco had cornered Tommy with the casual efficiency of a predator who had finally located his prey. The boy stood with remarkable composure, still wrapped in Martha's prayer shawl, facing the man who had murdered his mother without showing the terror that must have been consuming him. "Hello, Uncle Marco," Tommy said politely, his voice steady. "Despite the circumstances, I came to get something that belonged to my mama." Marco's scarred face showed surprise at the child's calm demeanor. Professional killers were accustomed to fear, pleading, and desperate attempts at escape. Tommy's simple directness disrupted expectations and created a moment of psychological uncertainty. "You should have stayed hidden, boy," Marco replied, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who had divorced himself from human emotion. "Now you die tonight, like your interfering mother." "Maybe," Tommy agreed with startling equanimity. "But Jessica gets to go home to her mama first." The mention of the other captive child clearly surprised Marco, who hadn't expected his target to know about the additional leverage being held in the compound. That moment of surprise gave Elias the opening he needed to enter the kitchen, positioning himself between Tommy and the armed killer. "The boy is under our protection," Elias said simply, his voice carrying decades of quiet authority. "You'll have to go through me to reach him." The final confrontation came down to 3 people in a mansion's kitchen: a professional killer, an Amish farmer, and a 10-year-old boy whose courage had brought them all to this moment. Marco held his weapon with practiced confidence, but something in Tommy's steady gaze seemed to unsettle him in ways that adult fear never had. Tommy reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his mother's heart-shaped locket, the same pendant she had worn every day of his life until Vincent Torino's men took it from her lifeless body. Opening it with trembling fingers, he revealed 2 small photographs, one of himself as a smiling toddler, the other of his father looking young and hopeful before violence entered their lives. "My mama said this would always keep us together," Tommy said quietly, his voice carrying across the tense kitchen like a prayer. "She said love is stronger than anything bad people can do." The locket's significance wasn't lost on Marco, who had been present when Elena Castellano died. He had searched her body for evidence, had taken that very pendant as a trophy, and had personally delivered it to Vincent Torino as proof of the job's completion. Seeing it now in her son's hands felt like witnessing a resurrection. "Where did you get that?" Marco demanded, his professional composure cracking for the first time. "Uncle Vinny gave it back to me at Mama's funeral," Tommy replied with devastating honesty. "He said it would help me remember her. He didn't know she taught me that remembering love makes you braver than being scared." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Marco had spent his adult life believing that fear was the ultimate weapon, that threatening what people loved most would always ensure compliance. But this child was using love itself as armor, drawing strength from memory rather than being paralyzed by loss. Elias stepped closer to Tommy, his presence both protective and supportive. "The boy speaks truth," he said calmly. "Fear loses its power when people choose love over safety." From somewhere in the mansion came the sound of breaking glass and shouting voices. Agent Martinez and Michael had located Jessica and were extracting her while Marco's attention focused on Tommy. The rescue was proceeding exactly as planned, but Marco seemed oblivious to everything except the child who had somehow transformed from prey into moral challenger. "Your mother begged for her life," Marco said, using cruelty as a weapon when physical intimidation failed. "She cried like a baby when she realized what was going to happen to her." Tommy's face showed pain at the deliberate cruelty, but his response revealed a wisdom that seemed impossible for his age. "I know she was scared. Being scared doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. But she also knew I would be okay because good people would take care of me." He looked directly at Marco with eyes that held compassion instead of hatred. "She probably felt sorry for you too, because hurting people means you never get to feel good about anything you do." The observation struck Marco like a physical blow. In 20 years of professional killing, No victim had ever expressed sympathy. For him, the concept that his targets might pity him, might see him as someone trapped by his own choices rather than empowered by them, challenged everything he believed about strength and control. "I should kill you where you stand," Marco said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Tommy agreed with heartbreaking acceptance. "But killing me won't make you feel better about yourself. It'll just make you more sad and angry and alone." From outside came the sound of vehicles arriving, federal agents responding to Agent Martinez's signal that the evidence had been secured and Jessica was safe. The coordinated raids on Torino properties across 3 states were beginning, ending. Years of criminal enterprise in a single night. Marco realized his mission was pointless. The evidence that could convict Vincent Torino was already in federal hands. The organization was being dismantled in real time, and the child he'd been sent to eliminate had become the instrument of their downfall. "It's over," Tommy said gently, somehow recognizing the moment when violence could transform into surrender. "You don't have to hurt anyone else. You can choose something different." The kitchen fell silent, except for the distant sounds of federal agents securing the compound. Marco stared at this remarkable child who had faced his mother's killer with forgiveness instead of hatred, who had risked everything to save another child, and who was now offering redemption to someone who had never believed it was possible. Agent Martinez appeared in the doorway with Jessica safe in her arms, the 9-year-old girl clinging to her mother's colleague with desperate relief. "It's finished, Marco," she said quietly. "Torino's in custody. The organization is gone. There's nothing left to fight for." Marco looked around the kitchen, at the federal agent holding a rescued child, at the Amish farmer who had risked his peaceful life to protect the innocent, and at Tommy still wearing his mother's locket like a badge of unshakable love. "I surrender," he said simply, setting down his weapon with hands that trembled slightly. "I surrender." The words carried weight beyond mere tactical capitulation. They represented the triumph of a child's moral courage over a lifetime of professional violence. Proof that love can indeed transform even the hardest hearts when offered without condition or reservation. 3 months later, the Lancaster County courthouse buzzed with quiet excitement as families gathered for what had become known throughout the community as the adoption that saved 2 worlds. Tommy sat beside Elias on a wooden bench that had been polished smooth by generations of hands, wearing his first set of traditional Amish clothes and clutching a small wooden cross he had carved himself during the long summer evenings. The cross was rough around the edges, bearing the imperfections of young hands still learning their craft, but its simplicity held profound meaning. Every cut of the knife had been made with love, every smooth surface polished with the patience Elias had taught him during quiet hours in the workshop. It represented Tommy's complete transformation from a traumatized boy running for his life to Thomas Elias Stoltzfus, a member of a family that had chosen him as surely as he had chosen them. "Are you nervous?" Sarah whispered, her 17-year-old wisdom still occasionally showing the excitement of someone about to officially become a big sister. "Happy nervous?" Tommy replied, his vocabulary now sprinkled with the careful cadences of Amish speech, but retaining the thoughtful precision that had always marked his communication. "Like when you know something wonderful is about to happen, but you can't quite believe it's real." Judge Patricia Holbrook called the proceedings to order with unusual warmth in her voice. In 30 years on the bench, she had overseen thousands of adoptions, but few had touched her as deeply as this case involving a community that had risked everything to protect one wounded child. "Mr. Stoltzfus," she addressed Elias formally, "you understand that adopting Thomas means taking responsibility not just for his daily care, but for his safety, his education, and his emotional well-being for the rest of his minority." "I understand, Your Honor," Elias replied with the quiet certainty that had guided every important decision in his life. "But more than that, I understand that Thomas has already become part of our family in every way that matters. Today just makes it official." Michael Castellano sat in the front row, his face showing the complex emotions of a father who was choosing to share custody of his son with people who had proven themselves more capable of providing safety than any government program. The Witness Protection Program had been dissolved following Vincent Torino's conviction, but Michael's new identity and relocated life meant Tommy would be safer remaining with the Stoltzfus family while visiting his biological father monthly under FBI supervision. "Tommy," Judge Holbrook addressed the boy directly, "do you understand what adoption means? Do you want to become Thomas Stoltzfus officially?" Tommy stood up with the formal courtesy he'd learned from watching Bishop Lapp address the community during Sunday services. "Yes, ma'am. I understand that it means Elias and Sarah and Samuel and Jacob are choosing to be my family forever, even though I'm not born to them. I'm choosing them too, because they showed me that families are made by love, not just by blood." The simple profundity of his answer brought tears to several eyes in the courtroom. Agent Martinez, now reassigned to the FBI's Child Protection Division and reunited with her own daughter, Jessica, smiled as she witnessed the happy ending her sacrifice had helped make possible. Bishop Lapp rose when invited to speak on behalf of the community. His weathered face showed deep satisfaction as he addressed the court about a process that had tested and ultimately strengthened their collective faith. "Your Honor, our community has always believed that God places people in our path when they need us and when we need them. Thomas came to us broken and afraid, but he also brought gifts we didn't know we needed: courage, forgiveness, and the reminder that protecting innocent life is worth any risk." He paused, his eyes finding Tommy in the crowd. "This boy has taught use that families are indeed chosen, and that love can transform any heart willing to receive it. We are honored to call him our own." When the gavel fell making the adoption official, Tommy immediately turned to hug Elias with the fierce joy of someone who never quite believed that good things could last. Sarah gathered both of them into her arms, creating a circle of family that had been forged in crisis but would endure in peace. The celebration afterward took place at the Stoltzfus farm, where 3 months of careful restoration had erased most traces of the federal investigation and criminal siege that had briefly transformed their peaceful world into a battlefield. Tommy's art now decorated the walls, no longer dark sketches of trauma, but bright drawings of farm life, family gatherings, and the simple beauty he found in his new world. "Look what I made for you," Tommy said to Elias as the festivities continued around them. He held out the wooden cross he'd carved, its surface still showing tool marks, but gleaming with the careful attention he'd given every detail. Elias accepted the gift with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. "It's beautiful, son, but why?" "A cross? Because you taught me that carrying something means you're strong enough to help other people with their burdens too," Tommy replied with wisdom that continued to astound the adults around him. "And because Mama always said love never really dies. It just changes shape and keeps protecting the people who need it." As evening approached and the last visitors departed, the Stoltzfus family settled into their familiar routine. Tommy helped with the evening milking, his small hands now confident with tasks that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Sarah read him stories from books that were becoming as familiar as old friends. Samuel and Jacob taught him traditional woodworking techniques that connected him to generations of craftsmen, but it was during the quiet moments before sleep, when Elias tucked him into bed with Martha's prayer shawl for comfort, that Tommy's transformation felt most complete. "Tell me about Mama Martha again," he requested, using the name he'd adopted for Elias's late wife. "She would have loved you immediately," Elias said, smoothing the boy's hair with gentle hands. "She always said that some children are born to you, and some are sent to you, but all of them are gifts that teach you about the depth of God's love." Tommy smiled sleepily, his fingers clutching the wooden cross he'd made. I think maybe she sent me here. When I was most scared and hurt, I prayed for someone to help me, and then I found you by the road. The observation carried truth that transcended coincidence. Looking at this remarkable child, who had survived unimaginable trauma to become a source of healing for everyone around him, Elias found it easy to believe in providence, purpose, and the power of love to transform the worst circumstances into unexpected blessings. Outside, the familiar sounds of evening settled over the farm cattle settling for the night, the whisper of wind through corn stalks, and the distant call of an owl beginning its nightly hunt. Inside, the Stoltzfus family slept peacefully, complete at last. Proof that sometimes the most broken things become the most beautiful when they're mended with patience, faith, and unconditional love.